In this video, we're going to send an email using the Resend service. We're going to then make that email look nicer using the React email package from the same team. We're going to create this simple form with React hook forms. We're going to validate the data using Zod. We're going to then handle the form submission using server actions. And at the end, we're going to add this toast notification using Sonar. There's a lot to unpack, so let's get right into it. Okay, so we're going to build on top of a project we had a couple of weeks on the channel where we implemented React hook forms and Zod verification and also server actions in a NextJs app. If you haven't watched that video, I'll include a link in the card somewhere so you can watch that first to understand how we did all that and how we got here. In this video, we're just going to create a contact page and a contact form where we would implement this form using React hook form the same way we did in the previous video. I'm going to walk you through step by step what I have done, but the basics or the foundation has been already laid out in that other video. So as you can see on the left-hand side, I'm building on top of the application we had by creating this contact page and a page.tsx inside of it. So this is the page that I have added, and this contact form is where we're actually implementing our contact form using React hook forms. Now this is very similar to the previous form we had, as I just showed in the beginning of the video. The previous form only had the name and message fields, but this time we also need the email for the contact us form. So let's walk through the steps here quickly. So ignore this process form for a second. Now the way that you would use the React hook form library, as you might have already seen in the previous video, is by use of this use form hook, which gives you back some functions whereby you could register different fields inside of your form and also tap into different states from the form state. So here, as you can see, I'm getting this register function, which helps me register different fields. So I'm registering a name field with the attribute name of name. I'm also registering an email field as well as the message down here. We're also getting back this handle submit. This is a function that you can pass in to the onSubmit event handler of your form. We're going to dive into this in a bit. And then we get this reset function, which allows you to reset the form. We also get this form state object, which gives you the errors object, which has keys mapping to these fields that you have registered. For example, there is a key on the errors object for the name, for the email, and for the message, if there's any errors. Now, the is submitting is the loading state where the form is actually being submitted. We're using this to actually show a different text or disable this button on the form to prevent users to hit the submit button when we're actually submitting the form. And we can also pass in a resolver to our React hook forms using Zod resolver, which needs a schema that defines the shape of our data coming in from our form. So let's just jump into this schema. It's very similar to the schema we had in the previous one. We just added this email, which is a string, should be non-empty and should be an email. So let me just close this off here from this schema. This is the benefit of using Zod. You can defer a type from your schema and use that inside of this use form if you're using TypeScript, and also pass it to this submit handler to know what is the type of data we're trying to get from our form. Now let's actually talk about this process form. This is a function that I have passed into this handle submit. The handle submit was a function we got back from the use form. It requires a callback, and it's going to call that callback passing in the form data to it. This is where the magic happens. You're going to do whatever asynchronous task that you want to do by submitting this form. Now, a regular or a traditional way of handling form submission is to create an API layer whereby you would just send a fetch request to that API layer with your data. That API layer is going to then talk to your database or do whatever it needs to do and then respond back to your client-side form. Now we're going to replace that whole logic or sequence with a server action called send email. which is going to send an email similar to how you would handle this from inside an API endpoint. After that, if it is successful, we're going to show a toast notification using the Sonar. It is a library I also introduced in a previous video where I talked about 10 different tools or UI libraries that I use. We're going to reset our form, and if there is any errors in the process, whether from sending an email or from our validation, we're going to also show an error toast notification. Now let's go into this send email action, which I have defined inside of our underscore action files. So if you have watched the previous video, we also had the action for add entry there. All I had done here is to also add a different action here called send email. So ignore what's up top there and let's dive right into this. Now inside of this send email server action, which is defined inside of our underscore actions, and we've denoted that these are server actions by using this use server directive up top. And here we're just receiving data. I'm using the same contact form inputs type that I inferred from my Zod schema. And we're parsing that data. Even though we are verifying this data on the client side, it's always a good idea to also validate the data that you're receiving from your users in your server before you're taking any actions on them. So I'm doing the same thing here. So I'm parsing that data. If we're successful, we're going to send an email. We're going to look into this in a second, but if we are unsuccessful, we're returning this object back to our client side with an error object on it, calling this format on from Zod on the error that's returned from Zod so that we know what field requires any attention from the user. Now here, as you can see, once we're successful parsing this data that's coming in from our form, we're going to try to send an email using the Resend package. Now, all you need to do to send an email using the Resend package is to install the library, which is Resend, and then create a new instance of this Resend package or class by passing in your API key. So let's jump into the Resend platform and documentation for a second so we understand the steps over here. If you go to the documentation, there is this quick start guides for Node.js and also NextJS specific quick start where you can install the package. You also can just copy an email template, which is just a React component. And that's what we're going to do in the beginning before we also make it look nicer with the React email package. So you can just create a simple React component and pass it to the Resend library or the Resend function. As you can see down here, we're calling this send. Let me just make this a bit bigger if it is too small. So we're calling this send function on the Resend instance we created up. We are creating a from. This needs to be a verified domain of yourself to be able to send emails from that domain. I'm going to show you in the dashboard where you can do that. And then you would specify to which address this email is supposed to go, give you the subject. You can also include previews. You can have a text-based email. You can have an HTML-based email, or you can just pass in a React component to this React key inside of this object. So as you can see, this email template is the same thing we created up top here, which is just a React component email template. It's going to get a first name and it's going to return a div with an h1 and that first name. If you've ever worked with emails or templating emails before, you know it's hard. It's not as easy of just writing up a React component or using all the HTML tags and CSS properties that you know. You're limited in the sense of what you can use inside emails, because if each email provider actually interprets emails differently, and that's where React email comes into place, where it standardizes your emails so you don't have to worry about actually creating a template that's not going to be rendered by email providers. So down here, we passed in our email template, and this is a React component. You could call it as a function and also pass in the necessary props to it. Maybe this is dynamically coming in from your functions. This is the exact same thing that we're doing. And that's it. That's as easy as you can see. 1, 2, 3 steps to send an email using the Resend package. Now, as you can see here, I have this contact form email. This is the email template that I created. So let's just dive into this for a second. It's up top here. So this is a regular React component. It is expecting name, email, and message as props. And it's just sending this simple email where it says contact form submission. It is telling me from whom is this contact form was submitted, the email, and then what the message was. For this, inside the project, I have created an emails folder where I'm just storing different email templates that I can use to send later on. So as I mentioned, this component requires 3 props. I'm calling it as a function here. I'm getting these 3 different props from the data that was returned or sent to this server action. We parse the data, making sure that it actually matches our schema. So I'm destructuring name, email, and message and passing them down to our contact form email. If this goes through, I'm returning a success through message with the actual data that's returned from the Resend package. This is going to give you an ID of the email that was sent, and if there's any errors, we're returning that error. So going back to our contact form, this is what we're getting out of this send email server action. I'm checking to see if I have the success property on it, meaning that the email was sent. Show the success toast message, and otherwise we're going to just say something went wrong. Now that we're here, let me also show you this toast notification from Sonar. This is a package that I introduced in that 10 Next UI libraries video that I use. Nonetheless, it's called Sonar. It's just a simple little package for showing toast notifications, like what you can see under my image down here. You can change where on the screen it shows and pass it different configs for the way that you want it to render, the content that you want it to send to it. Now, this is very simple to use. You just need to install the Sonar package. This is going to then give you 2 things back. It's a toaster component, and the other one is a toast function. The toaster component, I assume it's a portal that you can port these notifications to so they stay out of your React DOM. And then the toast function is when you can actually call it to show these notifications. So going back to our app, because we're using the app directory, I've created this providers file. This is a pattern we've seen on previous videos on the channel where we want to share a context or any client-side code or components. And this is the same thing here. I've created this component which uses the use client directive up top. I'm getting this toaster component from Sonar, and this providers wraps around our application. And these children are going to be our React server components or any other page or layouts inside of our root layout. And then we're going to also pass this toaster component underneath. This is where we can plug in different notifications. As I mentioned, there are different options you can pass into this toaster component, such as the position where this notification actually shows up, whether or not you want to change the color depending on if it is a successful message rather than an error message. If you want multiple messages to expand on top of each other or to just be slided on top of each other, whether or not you want to include a close button. So you can read through it. There are a couple of options you can pass in. There's not that much extensive, but it just gives you the necessary features that you would want from a toast notification. Now we would bring this provider's component back into our root layout where we're actually wrapping our children with these providers. A common question that I get on the channel is, if you're wrapping the whole application or all of our pages with this providers, which is a client component with this use client directive, isn't that going to turn everything into a client component? And the answer is no. You can pass in server components as children, or as props to client components without affecting them being a server component. The only thing you cannot do is importing server components in client components. Here we're not importing our server components, we're just passing them as a children. Now imagine this use client directive as a boundary between your server and client. Once you have marked this boundary, anything that you import inside or after this boundary, it is going to be included in the client-side module. That's why you cannot import server components where you have already defined this use client component. But with this pattern of passing in server components as children, it's as if you're creating little holes or little slots empty inside of your client component where you can just plug in the result of the HTML rendered on your server and then plug them inside your client components. So just thought to explain this pattern and clarify if there is any confusion around wrapping our whole root layout with a client component and not worrying about this turning our whole application into a client-side component. So let me just close this off. The next thing that I want to do is actually test this email for a second. So this submitting is actually reading this is submitting parameter down there inside of my button. I'm disabling this button, and then once this was submitted, you could see that notification also showed up. Going back to our email, now we should have gotten that email. The contact form submission from Hamed and the email and the actual message that we included. Now, as you can see, this is just using regular React component to compose this email. Now we can take this further. You can definitely style this, but there are certain things you can do and you cannot do when it comes to emails. Now, figuring those things out is hard. That's why I would recommend you using the React email package, which, as I mentioned, it's a library or a package developed by the same team that created Resend. Now, this is going to help give you some components that you can use to create or to template your emails in a React way. So in a similar fashion that you would just template a component, you can just use these components that you can see on the left-hand side here. Let me just also make this a bit bigger. Well, we lost that. So we have the HTML, the head, the button, column, row, containers, link, images, and anything that you would want to put in here. Now there's two ways that you can install the package. As you can see under this get starting, automatic setup or a manual setup. The automatic setup, it's going to actually create a NextJs project whereby you can create these emails and have them previewed. So as you can see down here, this is a fully featured NextJs app, if I'm not mistaken, that you could just actually preview your emails. I'm not going to do this because I already have an NextJS app. I'm going to opt into using the manual setup. This requires you actually creating or installing the package, which is React Email. You would have to also install the React Email and any component that you would want to use, or just install React Email /components. So let me just go back to the example that I'm using from here to show the packages real quick. So inside my emails, I'm using this magic link. Now, as you can see here, I've installed the React Email /components. This exposes all the components that you can see here. You can also click on them and see what exactly they're going to do, how you can use them, examples, and different props you can pass to them. So React Email is the first package, and the React Email components is the other package. And if you wish to just get them one by one, you can also install individual packages like this button over here. I prefer to do it this way. It's a matter of preference over here. So going back to the manual setup, you can just create these packages. And what you can also do is to also create a script for this package to also run and spin up a server to show you the preview. So let's go to our package JSON. What I've done here is also included this email script, which is going to run email dev. This is going to use the React email package to actually spin up a server. And I've specified a different port because my application is running on port 3000. So this is 3600. This is going to spin up a server for you to just review or preview your emails. If you don't wish to use that preview functionality, you don't really need this script because this is just to install some dependencies and spin up a server or a NextJS app to preview your emails. I didn't use it because it installed so many different packages inside of my project that wasn't necessarily useful to my project. I can just test it out by sending emails to myself and test the emails or figuring out the template. But this exists. You can also have this as a separate project where you would just do the automatic setup, where you would just create a new project. You then template your emails in that project, where you can also preview them. And once you are happy with the result, you can just bring them back inside of this emails folder and just copy that component. So I think it's better to live, if you wanted the preview functionality, it's better to live as an extra package, an extra project that you have, where you can just template your emails and then preview them, and then once you're happy, just plug and play or copy and paste the components to whatever project that you're working on. But on the project that you're actually sending that email, you just need that component and the packages that I mentioned to then use with the Resend package. It makes it easy because these are React components. You can just plug them back into the same key in the Resend package to send the email using this. So let me just show you that part. What I've done here before I go back to the server action is that on this page, you can see some examples. These are different examples that you can actually use as a foundation to also change and create your own templates. Obviously, don't copy paste these. Use them as an inspiration for creating your own emails or learn how to use these different components together. I've just copied over this Notion magic link. This is where you try to log into Notion. I've created this one. It actually needs a login code to be passed to it, but I'm using it as an example. So going back to our actions where I'm sending this email, I can just turn, instead of sending this, what I can do is that I've imported this magic link email component from my emails folder. This is the same component that we just saw. I can pass it here as a function. And now the Resend package, when sending an email, is going to use this template. So in a similar fashion where we created our own component, you can use React email components. So let's also test this out. I'm going to go back, delete this email that we got earlier. I'm going to go to our application. Let's refresh this to get rid of any router cache that might be stored in the browser. I'm going to send another email. And this message now here doesn't matter because this specific component or template that we're using, it's not actually using any of these fields. So going back to my email, I should receive a new email that should look something like the template we just saw from Notion. I don't have this image inside of my project, so it's not showing up correctly. But as you can see, it's similar to this template that we just saw. So just to recap, we use this Resend package to send emails. We could send a text version of our email, an HTML version of our email. We could also pass in a React component. We tested with a custom React component that we created by passing in simple information to our React component. We also looked at the React email package that allows you to write emails that can be rendered by different email providers, so you don't have to worry whether or not your information is shown correctly on the emails. We copy and pasted this magic link email from the React email package. We learned that we can also spin a separate project for React email where we can template our emails and preview them, and then copy and paste the final components into whatever project that we want to use. Or if we didn't want that preview functionality, we can just create an emails folder, install the packages that allows us to actually render this type of templates using the components that come from the React email, and then use that to send our emails. That's a wrap for this video, folks. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. Like always, the link to the source code is down in the description, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.